Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I hope your day went well. My day is just starting. I don't know if Sultan told you, it's 5 o'clock in the morning here in the United States.
5 a.m.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll try to make this as painless as possible. Uh, uh, Let me take care of just a few items before we get started. One of the items we need to talk about is what happens if the connection drops, or what happens if you're doing a presentation. You know, when you do a presentation in class, and when you set up a presentation in class, everything sometimes doesn't go the way you had it set up or the way you planned. And the same thing happens in an online environment. I mean, so what, as a teacher, what you need to do with your students, or what we need to do with our students, is to prepare them if the connection drops, if something doesn't work correctly, any of those kinds of things that can occur, you need to be prepared for. So what I did initially, and when I talked to Sultan earlier, I told him that if the connection dropped or if the presentation didn't go well, for him to actually show, there's a video we're going to be looking at later on, to show that video to you. But on another point, what you need to remember to do is that with your students, you can't do that. There's nobody, if they're at home or if they're at a distant location, there's not going to be anybody there to show them a presentation. So rather than have people fight the technology, and I tell the teachers this all the time, I tell my teachers this all the time, rather than have them fight the technology, just have or be prepared to have your students move to an alternative, to do something different, to go online, or rather than sit there and become agitated with things not occurring, doing well. I've always been one that would say, you never fight the technology. You never make people restless in a presentation. So having said that, we're prepared that if something doesn't occur correctly, then we will move on. Okay, Sultan, do you want to give me control? Do I have control so I can bring my PowerPoint presentation up and we can start the presentation? Well, let me do this first. Do you have any questions before we get started?
Anybody? Any questions before we start? I think we're good. We can
Okay,
start.
that's good. Okay, so then once you give me control of the screen, let me be the presenter.
We need to share the screen.
Okay, let me do this. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Okay, what we're going to talk about is managing and creating student discussions for educators. And I think one of the things that, even though we're talking this in relationship to online discussions, I think as teachers, we know that this can apply to a regular classroom situation. So not only does it apply to online discussions, but I think it also applies to your regular classroom. I think one of the things that you need to be aware of is, before you do an online discussion, what I would do is I would do this face-to-face with your students. I would make sure that we manage a discussion within the class where it's face-to-face, and then if you have the technology, and if the technology is available to the students, then you can move it to an online discussion. So what are online discussions, or what are discussions in general? Okay, online discussions are a great tool to extend classroom conversations and learning by getting students to engage with class materials. Why do we do an online discussion? Once again, why do we have discussions in general? In class, discussions can continue online and vice versa. Students can prepare for class activities by engaging in online discussions that are designed to have students to get familiar with topics. And really, probably the biggest thing with online discussions is the critical thinking skills that you can develop. Here's a statement by Wang Chen, who is a writer, and I think this kind of sums up not only having an online discussion, but also having a discussion in general. It says, compared with spontaneous and transitory face-to-face class discussions, online discussions are text-based and more structured, providing students time to formulate thinking and compose posting, thus helping to promote student higher order learning. So the whole concept of this is for us to maybe bring out in a student more creativity. And the discussion, as we look at this statement, or these statements that are on this page, is that students have time to think about their responses when they're dealing with an online discussion, because they're typing them out. It becomes more text-based, and it kind of helps that creative thinking process. If we think eventually our students are going to go out, your students and my students are going to go out into the world, and a lot of the things that they communicate with other people are text-based now. We have these, there's a lot of online collaborative discussions that go on in the business world. So makes sense. Now, how do you create an effective online discussion, or how do you create discussions? We prepare discussion posts that invite questions, discussions, reflections, and responses. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy, we're going to talk about that a little bit. And there are two things that when you do a discussion that you want to deal with. You want to create a problem or a discussion group that will, in effect, have high-ordered thinking skills. That's what we want to do. And we want to give students the time to prepare for that. The other thing that's absolutely critical, number two, is to create a rubric and give those students that rubric. The rubric is telling the students what they need to do when they are in discussion groups. It structures them. A lot of times we create discussions, but we don't tell the students what we're looking for in the discussion, what we expect them to do, how we expect them to answer questions. So creating a rubric is critical. Now, Bloom's taxonomy, I don't know if you're aware or have used this. I'm going to take you to an internet site, and Sultan is going to give you this presentation, so you're going to have it. But Bloom's taxonomy is a way of creating questions or discussion groups, or even testing, doing assessments. And if you look at the bottom, it starts out with remembering, but then the questions go all the way up to creating. So we're going to look at this. We're going to look at this piece. And once again, I'll give you this website so you can look at it. Bloom's taxonomy here in the United States is used a lot. In all of our teacher training that we do at universities, and I used to teach at a university, they use this extensively for teacher training. So let's take a look at Bloom's taxonomy. Here it is: remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, and evaluating, and creating. So we start off with remembering. And so our question that we create, or a discussion that we create, is, can the student recall or remember information? They can define, they can duplicate, they can list, they can memorize, they can recall, they can repeat. A lot of times when we think of mathematics and we're using mathematics, a lot of times we give them problems to do. We give them equations to solve. And so it starts off with them just simply being able to solve an equation. And then as we move up the scale, it becomes problem solving at the creating component. Understanding. Can the student explain ideas or concepts? Can they classify? Can they describe? So can they discuss? And you can read those. I don't need to read these to you. So understanding is something that we we do with students, and we try to get them to deal with. And as we go up the ladder, applying. Can the student use this information in a new way? Can they choose? Can they demonstrate? Can they dramatize? So what we're doing is we're moving from students doing remedial tasks at the very bottom and moving to up the ladder to be able to do other kinds of things and to eventually uh, analyze. Can they appraise? Can they compare? Can they contrast? Can they criticize? So these are critical words that, as we move up the ladder, that we should see in the types of questions that we add. Now, keep in mind, the things at the bottom of the ladder are just as important as we move up the ladder. In order for them to get to the creating kind of at the top, at the point of the triangle, in order for them to do that, we've got to we have to establish a base. And if you notice, at the very bottom of this base, we deal at the base of the triangle. We look at remembering to start off with. So important. Evaluating, can the students justify or stand by their decision? You know, a lot of times we have debates, in discussion groups, we have students who have different opinions, and as teachers, we should create questions and discussions that force the students to do these kinds of things. But once again, we need to make sure that students are aware of that they need to appraise, they need to argue. So sometimes we give them jobs. Maybe in the discussion group we'll give them a job to do. You know, they take different sides on a particular question. And then finally, and sometimes we don't do this as teachers. At least I didn't. I know when I first started out, I wasn't in this mode of thinking. But allowing the students to create, to establish a discussion group. In your class, you could have the students go through and say, okay, here's a type of question that we want to answer, that we want to work on. So we force the student now to not just be a robot, not just start out answering questions, but now to be able to create questions. Now, Bloom's taxonomy, which, like I said, here in the United States is used a lot. I mean, we use this a lot. These are some sites, and once again, I said I'm going to have Sultan give you these. These are websites here in the United States that deal with Bloom's taxonomy. Google, if we go to that site, Google has a whole list of different things that they are tools that you can use for Bloom's taxonomy. So this is one site that I think is very good. And by the way, this Kathy Chirac that we go back to and look at, if we go back and look at Kathy Chirac here, she's been around a long time. She does a lot of technology presentations here in the United States. Been around a lot. She's since retired, but her website is outstanding, not just for Bloom's taxonomy, but also for integrating. And I'll show you another site that she has that will deal with that. And if you look here, if you want to know more about Bloom's taxonomy, this is a site that gives you complete information about it. And if you notice, it goes through different kinds. It gives you sheets, just a whole lot of information on how to create not only questions in discussion groups, but how you create test questions that lead your students to become very creative in that answer. So we'll click that off. And then finally, how do we set learning objectives? How do we set up learning objectives that students need to deal with? And once again, if you look at this, see how this gives you different words, different kinds of phrases. You know, I'm not going to go through all of this. You can certainly see, here's Bloom's taxonomy: remembering, understanding, applying, and then as you go up the scale, this is how you should create your questions that deal with that. Now, having said all of this, you know, I know as a teacher, and I started out teaching mathematics, as before I became a principal and then a superintendent. And those are people who oversee schools here in the United States. Um, as I started out uh, going through that process, I did, I would always create questions on assessments that distinguished my students. We would start out with the lower order thinking skills, and then at the very top, I'd always have a question that only my top students would be able to answer. And so it let me distinguish between them. And it's the same thing in business. In business, where our students are going to go out and perform, you have people who will just simply file papers, and you have people who are the creative people in your corporation or in your company that can do things. And so um, you need to distinguish between those. Okay, now before I talk about rubrics, a rubric, do any of you have any questions about Bloom's taxonomy? Anything I can answer for you?
It's actually not a clarification. Hi, this is Sunita Rao here.
Yeah, hello, Phil.
Yeah, go ahead. Give me that question, so please.
Yeah, it's not a clarification on Bloom's taxonomy. It was just a discussion which we recently had in terms of the questioning patterns in the classroom.
I can't hear the question. There's a lot of echoing because of the room. Sultan, do you want to repeat that question for me, please?
Sure, sure.
You should speak so very close by.
Yeah, actually the mic is here. Sorry. Yeah, hello, Phil.
Go ahead.
This is Ms. Sunita Rao. She's the principal for the GPS. So I'm just giving the mic to her.
Oh, okay, great.
Hi, Mr. Phil.
Hi, how are you?
Very fine, thank you. We are quite excited to be on board like this because we expect a lot of sharing to happen in the next weeks to come.
Great.
My clarification was not on Bloom's taxonomy. It was just that a few days back, quite a few educationists got together and we were discussing as to how the questioning pattern in the classroom revolves more on testing, remembering, and the lower rung of the Bloom's taxonomy rather than taking it ahead to check on their analyzing or synthesizing kind of skills.
Right.
So it seems to be very relevant to reiterate Bloom's taxonomy and to see where we stand in the classroom.
Very good. It really does. I mean, as you're going through that discussion with your teachers, like I said, Bloom's taxonomy here in the United States is used it's been used for years. When I first came up, and I've been in education for 40 some years. When I first came up, and that was in I'm going to show you my age. That was in the latter part of the 70s. They were using Bloom's taxonomy there also. It really is a great way to get teachers or the teachers themselves to think about, as you're creating discussions within your class, or you're doing it online, or you're doing it on a test, a great way to create questions. Because if you don't think in those terms, we have a tendency to always be at the lower end.
Because that is more, it's like testing the factual part of the learning. There was also this discussion on whether we are focusing on questions that are open-ended or closed, or questions that lend itself to superficial learning or deep learning.
Correct. Yeah. And it sounds like you're definitely moving in the right on the right track as far as getting students to not be robots. I mean, a lot of students can regurgitate or give you back information that you give them. It becomes very difficult for students to start to think on their own. One of the things I used to teach computer programming. I started out teaching mathematics, and then I went to teaching computer programming, and that's in the probably mid 80s that I started that. And students did not like not being given a cookbook recipe on how to do things. You force them to think. It's like geometry. When you teach geometry and you have to do formal proofs, most students don't like geometry. And the reason why they don't like it is because the formal proof requires them to think outside the box.
Okay. I think I'm sure like colleagues here have lots to share with you. Would anybody like to speak?
I'd love to see that.
Come, Hema. Hema Bindo from the Maths department. She would like to share more, I believe. There's a lot of experiences that we have. And the terminology like Bloom's taxonomy excites us.
Very good. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Hello sir, this is Hema Bindu. I'm a maths teacher as well. And I'm very, very glad that I'm interacting with a old school math teacher.
Yeah, thank you.
My question is, we are adapting Bloom's taxonomy very well, even into our lesson plans as well. But the only thing is, there is a new version of Bloom's taxonomy. We have seen that. My question is, there are questions related to contrast, differentiate at the comprehension level, and there are questions related to contrast, differentiate at the analyzing level as well. How do we differentiate these two then? Because there is difference between the cognitive levels when it comes to comprehension as well as analyzing. So how do we differentiate the questions? I mean, both speak or sound the same.
Yeah, I think if I understand your question, a lot of time we get into you start off with the mathematical basic concepts, but I think one of the things we look at is an extended response. We not only ask the students to give us a concrete answer, but we ask the students to explain that answer and be able to give terminology that takes the concept that they're getting and applying it to a real world situation. So in order to get this, we look out in the real world and we take the mathematical concepts and how can they take what they're learning. Sometimes we teach them algebraic equations, but they don't know how to use that algebraic equation in a real world setting, and how to create a problem in which they use an equation to solve real-world problems. So I think that's where how we distinguish between the two. We ask them to give an extended response that comes through and explains what they're learning. What does this apply to? It's kind of like when we deal with measurement. In measurement, they can solve that equation, but if you ask them to start to put the classes of measurement, like centimeters, kilometers, those kind of things, and finally give their answer, and what does that answer mean? Does it mean distance? Does it mean time? So I think we, from a mathematical concept, I think that's where it needs to go. It needs to go where students not only give you a concrete answer, but also can explain that answer in a real world setting.
They should have a deeper understanding of meaning when it comes to analyzing.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank
Sounds
you very
very
much.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to this rubric, and I'm sure I certainly don't want to insult you. I know that you use a rubric in your classroom, but these are sites that actually will give you an easy way to create a rubric. And they're sites that, like I said, once again, we'll share with you after the presentation. I'll make sure Sultan gets you a copy of this. But this Ruby Star website has been around for a long time here. And if we go there, just to give you an idea of how it works, you can create an account. They don't charge you. Doesn't cost anything to create the account. But if you look at this, there are ways to create a rubric, and rather than you having to think about what the terminology you're going to use in your rubric, they have templates that do that. And because I'm a math teacher, I'm a little biased, so I'm going to go I'm going to go to math just to kind of give you an idea of how this works. And once again, you can have an account for yourself. They don't charge you for it. You can save the rubrics you create here at this place. And you know, we need to, once again, we need to tell students how they're going to be graded, what our expectations are. And especially a lot of times when we have online discussion groups or discussion groups in general, we don't tell them what our expectations are for what the students are doing. A rubric's a great way to do that. So if you give the students a rubric before they get into those discussions, I think that's great. So let me take a look, just to give you a brief look at this and how it creates it. Let's say, for example, math problem solving, and we know problem solving usually is one of those higher order thinking skills that we kind of look at. So if we click on that, what it does is you can put a name to it. But here's what's really cool: when you come down here, as you go through and you click on this. Let's say in our problem solving, we want them to understand mathematical concepts. It already generates the rubric. It generates what's a 4-point, what's a 3-point, 2-point, and it continues on all the way down so that you can establish whatever type of rubric you want to establish in math problem solving. And the concepts or the categories that you deal with are here. And as you change them, so does change the rubric. So it's really a pretty great place to go and do that. excuse me. To actually create rubrics. And if you notice, let me go back there. It deals with all the areas. It deals with a lot of different topics in that. So it's great. Once again, it's a great place to deal with. And then here are some other sites. An e-portfolio, if you want them to. And how do you do that? Here's an assessment rubric. Institutional assessments and compliance. Once again, these are ones that I found have been very good to use when you're creating a method of assessment other than A, B, C, D, or other than percentages. This kind of works in that arena. Now, I'm going to have this is a video. This video talks about managing online discussions, but once again, here's what I want you to do. As you're looking at this, think about not only online discussions, but how do you apply this to your classroom? So because you can't hear the audio from me, I'm going to have Sultan run this video. He's going to run it, and then Sultan, when you're done, when the video is done playing, it's about 10 minutes, okay? And some of it I think is really good, but I think it gets us to think in a way in which we want to manage our class. So so if Sultan, if you could run that video for me, let me know when it's completed. Like I said, it's about 10 minutes, and we'll go from there.
Sure, definitely. I'm playing the video.
Okay.
Most online classes is the discussion forum, especially when you're involved in theory types of classes that rely on discussion, debate, students interacting, discourse of some kind. So let's look at some of the advice that people have created over the past decade or two related to discussion forums based on significant amounts of research. I mean, this is an area just with a plethora of research on it. Teaching online courses, discussion forum, coming here from Indiana University. Well, there's many things to consider for handling these online discussions. And you use them because you want students actively engaged with one another and then reflecting on what it is that they learn. Taking ownership over the knowledge, sharing points of view, right? So this empowerment of the learner, the shifting of control from the instructor to the student. But there has to be some kind of management structure, some kind of structure for them to know what to do and when to provide something, how much to provide. the timing of all these things. Good critical thinking prompts are important in the open of your discussion forum. Reflection prompts, protocols for knowing when to go in, when the discussion conference or forum is going to start. Your role as instructor, who weaves things together, summarizes for the students, who might kickstart and prompt things, is vital for your students, right? Making sure that students understand the type of genre or discourse pattern that you're expecting. Is it persuasiveness? Is it debate? Is it just knowledge dumping and popping down maybe what it is you learned or observed in a field experience? What is the area that you're trying to focus in on? The subject line is vital. What does that subject line tell other potential readers or discussion responders to do? What is it that this form? So teaching students how to create a controversial subject line but accurate. Assigning due dates. So due dates are not as important as modeling. They're not as important as guidelines. Due dates do tend to give people some kind of structure for the class. Think about roles and responsibilities for your students when designing a discussion forum. You know, some students might take lead roles. Some students might be pessimists or optimists. You know, you might have a sign-up sheet on the front end of the class where everyone signs up, wants to be a starter, wants to be a wrapper of that online discussion. But at the same time, students are assigned roles. The instructor still needs to have a presence in the class, still needs to be involved, monitoring, modeling, and so forth. And part of that will be learned from reading to people on how to manage classes, going to the e-moderator's website for more plain version, and finding resources for managing your discussion. Maybe even if you're ambitious, think about certificate programs from Indiana or master's programs from Maryland, and other certificate programs at the University of Wisconsin. If you're really interested in this, you could pursue that. There are challenges, of course, in teaching in these online environments. There are just so many. And part of that will teach classes going to the e-moderator's website. So ambitious, think about certificate. Maybe even if you're ambitious, think about certificate programs from Indiana or master's programs from Maryland and other certificate programs at the University of Wisconsin. If you're really interested in this, you could pursue that. There are challenges, of course, in teaching in these online environments. There are just so many challenges in these discussion forums that you might hold. You might have students who sign up for a class and sign up to take a role in week 2, week 3, and then drop in week 1. You have to reassign someone to the role. That happens to be almost every semester. This is one of the big problems that I have is students sign up or don't sign up for roles. But they do sign up, they drop the class, and then I replace them in time for discussion and so it flounders. So be aware of that. Too much discussion, too little discussion from the instructor. If the instructor did too much, students will sit back and wait for the almighty me to be there and pontificate what he or she knows. If you're in too little, the discussion will flounder and there won't be a whole lot of things happening that when the instructors ask factual questions like when did the cotton gin, when was it invented, or who was the third president of the United States, those will get immediate answers, hopefully correct for one student, but all 30 students in the class need to answer a factual question. And we have students like I had, Larry Curly, part Larry, part Low, part Curly, who get to be sort of obnoxious within the class. And students, I had this one who was a returning adult student who dominated the discussion, and everybody wanted to see Larry Curly had to say. As a result of Larry, I created a role called the one-letter role, which gets people incisive a little bit. You have to be not only pointing out criticisms of other people's posts, but doing sort of like other guidelines for teaching online, designing protocols for how to interact, making students aware of the type of discourse you're expecting, monitoring that discussion a couple of times a week. So you may be in on Mondays, Fridays, or Sundays, and Saturdays, and once during, but make sure that you're in a few times during the week. And if I had advice to give you, it's to post first. It's a controversial topic, and be the first responder, and always post to the last person to post, post to reply. Students will feel as though you're there. They'll go to the online portal, they'll see you first, they'll see you at the bottom. Wow, that person's in here all the time. And then you might not be. See, being sneaky a little bit, okay? Spur discussion with questions and controversial statements. Other differences among the posts of your students, and as well as the commonalities. Summarize where conflict happened, how you might have compromise. Assign students to coach or question or be the devil's advocate for the week. You know, you might have a set of 6 roles every week and assign different 6 students to them. The other 14 or 20 students can be whatever they want to be. Require reflection cases, recapping what they've learned, or doing a blog posting, reflecting on what they've learned in the online forum, extending that forum. Assigning moderators, starters, and enders to this discussion week. Ask someone who's going to start, someone who's going to end. If you're summarizing, don't summarize or read too often. If you read too much, then students will expect you, the almighty person, to come in to read. Let students know when they can expect you to come in, so they know that you might be in on Wednesdays, and you're not going to be in at 3 o'clock on Monday morning. Okay? Else beginning of the week, notice the ending of a week, so students know when the session is started or ended. Consider assigning students specific activities wrapped around the discussion, and if it's a blended course, you might bring in the discussion posts to the face-to-face divisions of the class for discussion. Praise students, include their names, clap for them a little bit. Say, wow, this is great. All right, we've got it into our class. So, yeah, all right, we can always clap for our students and welcome them in. Require them to post 3 sentences. The first sentence will say, I think, I believe, I feel, and I agree with the last person, what he or she had to say. That's the first 2 sentences typically. It's the third sentence where they actually finally start posting something of significance. You know, and so have them fill the screen, maybe. Because I told one semester to fill the screen, and I got more critical thinking from that one post than I ever got previously. Again, refer to students by name. Hey, Jim, I agree with what you had to say. This is maybe what you didn't consider in your particular post there. Change the subject header. If it's not controversial enough, change it. And require students to respond to each other's posts. Not only post online, but respond to each other. And if you're creating groups, create groups of at least 5 or 6, and maybe no larger than 15. Around 10 to 12 is ideal for this. Or if you have less than 6, they don't know what to do typically. Include some paired activities. Include some little friend or email pal activities. Students get to know each other a little bit better in a safe environment. And again, discussion prompts that are going to get them to elaborate on what they have to say. And if discussion is veering off into another direction altogether, guide them and bring them back on course. And encourage them to come in, not just at the end and when the deadline is, but early and often. Build in ways, requirements, if you have to, for that interaction, and post the rules for etiquette for interacting with one another. And so I'm wishing you the best discussion forum you've ever dreamed of having. There are so many possibilities for your online discussions for weaving those things, those components together to create exciting, engaging ideas and discussions so that your students can pull the threads together to themselves, take ownership over the content, push each other a little bit. You can nudge them along. If you combine the discussions with your textbook readings, with your lectures, you can create some really interesting outcomes for your students, and something they can go back and look at later and say, hey, I learned something in this class. It's right there in that discussion forum. Good luck in those discussion forums that you're going to have.
Yeah, hello, Phil.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, we are done with the video.
Okay, so you know the video talks about online, and once again, you know, the Learn Beyond system is an online system, so that's where a lot of the discussion we're having is coming from. But having been a teacher and having, you know, been in the classroom for I would say probably about 15 years before I moved into administration and in other areas, I started out as I was a technology coordinator for a county here in the United States, but you can still take some of these concepts that he talked about and use them in your classroom. I don't know the kind of connectivity that your students have, and whether discussion, an online discussion, is even feasible with your students, based on not knowing what their connectivity is. But if they do have connectivity, if the students do it, what a great way to get or to extend your classroom outside your walls and be able to do it, be able to do some things, or have the students do their own. There's a concept here in the United States that is becoming somewhat popular, and I don't know, you may already know it. Once again, I don't want to insult you from that piece. It's called flipped learning. And the flipped learning concept is, rather than the teacher teaching the concept in the classroom, the students are learning the concept outside of the classroom, whether they learn it from a learning management system or whether they learn it from some other on the internet, but they learn the concept. And then when they come in, or the teacher gives them the concept to learn at home, and when they come in, now they know what they don't know. In mathematics, if you didn't understand the quadratic equation, okay, I give you the quadratic equation, and you go home and you work on that at home, and then you come back and say, well, you know what, I didn't understand how to deal with that radical sign. How do I simplify that radical sign? So those are the kinds of things that you do. That's called flipped learning, where students would watch a video, and then, in other words, if I were to do that and use that concept here, I would have had you watch the video before you came to the session, and then you could come back and say, okay, we have these questions about the video. So there's that. And once again, this was a university instructor, so he talked about students leaving the classroom or leaving the course. I don't think that's a situation in your case. That's a different piece. But there were definite concepts that he presented that I thought that you could use within the classroom, be either in an online or just within your classroom itself, in small groups in those areas. So it's once again, we present this information to you, and you need to digest it and make it part of your teaching style. How do you go into your classroom and change maybe your method of teaching to make students understand better? And keep in mind, I always used to say in technology, teachers used to talk about technology and how do you use the technology. And the one concept I always try to get across to them is, if the technology improves instruction, then you use it. If it doesn't improve instruction, if it doesn't improve student understanding, then you don't play it just to do it. You don't do it just to deal with that. So I'm going to let me go back to the presentation, and here are some benefits for students and teachers of doing online discussions. It builds connections in class community. It forces students to communicate with each other. It contributes to the development of cognitive and critical thinking skills. So this is kind of a summary component. Facilitates explorer learning. Certainly you can read this. Once again, I told you Sultan will give you this presentation so that you have it. I don't need to read this to you. You can go in that area. So those are the kind of things that it is. Now, there's a second video, but I'm not going to bore you with that second video. We'll give you a link to this, and you can look at it. It once again talks about teaching with online discussions. I think it's pretty good. You can look at it on your own and deal with that. But let me stop here again, excuse me, and see if you have any other questions about what we just saw, or about what that instructor said, or in general.
Anybody any questions?
We good?
Yes, I think we are good.
Okay. Then the last thing that I want to show you is kind of a learn beyond component, and And once again, you understand if your students have connectivity, but in Learn Beyond itself, the learning management system part of Learn Beyond, uh, it has a discussion forum, so you can create discussions for your students in this forum. And I know some of you are using the Learn Beyond system for some things, but here's the discussion forum, and this is how you would create the discussions for your students to do wherever. That's your choice how you use it. And in this one, this is the email system. The email system is in Learn Beyond can be controlled. It can be strictly internal. Students can't mail outside of it. Can be inside of it. But here's an email system, and once again, it's another communication package. Discussion forums, email, and finally this e-classroom, which I think some of you have been using, and kind of what we're doing here. We're using a different method of e-classroom, a virtual classroom, where you share. So this is all built into the Learn Beyond system, which I know you're starting to implement into the school itself. So this is and this talks about the e-classroom, which is actually very good. It allows you to share information. So I guess from a standpoint, you need to look at two things. First of all, we talked about discussions and how you can plan discussions. Well, three things actually in discussions. We talked about rubrics and how we need to make sure your students understand what you're going to be testing on, what your expectations are, and rubrics do that. And then the final thing is picture how you could use this system that I just did. I'm here in the United States. You can actually, using the e-classroom, be able to do what I'm doing. It does, believe me, it does take planning. It's not, things happen within the classroom. Some things don't work sometimes in the system, but I think you need to allow for that. So if you're doing an e-classroom presentation to your students, and once again, the connectivity of your students, you need to, what we do, what's called storybook. So before I did this presentation, I storybooked this out. I kind of have a somewhat plan of how things are going to go. Doesn't mean it works that way. Doesn't always. In fact, I'll be honest with you. This morning, when I first got up, my machine lost connectivity. The PowerPoint presentation I just showed you had a problem. So I had to go back and reset stuff. So you kind of have to plan that out and make sure things go smoothly. But in a final analysis, do not fight the technology. Have an alternative plan. Make sure that your students understand that if something's not working, you're not going to spend 15, 20 minutes trying to fix something. There's nothing worse than doing a presentation that doesn't work and then you continue to fight the technology. There's some people that do that. Here in the United States, they use projectors, or they use projectors, an old-time system, but use DVDs, and it doesn't work, and they spend 15, 20 minutes trying to fix it. Not me. Move on. You're teachers. You've done this before. You understand your classroom. Some type of presentation doesn't work, some activity you planned in the classroom doesn't work, then you need to move on. And once again, the important thing is, are students learning, and am I doing it in such a nature that I'm improving instruction? Any questions?
I think you're good, Phil.
Well, great. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this has been beneficial. Look forward to doing other sessions. We'll create, if there's some topic that you would like me to address, just either give it to Sultan or email me. I think you have my email. If not, Sultan will give it to you, and we'll try to create something that maybe I can clarify. And to be honest with you, this is me talking to you and giving information, but I like the two-way conversation. I like asking questions and being able to hear what you're doing in relationship to what we're doing here in the United States, and being able to adjust, because certainly we're not all knowing. Not everything works. It sounds smooth, that sounds great, but it doesn't always work that way. And hopefully this is, like I said, you find it beneficial. With that, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. My day, like I said, is just starting, so I'll be off and running around. I have grandchildren I have to manage today, so that's how that plays out. Have a great day.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Phil. Thanks for your time. Thanks for waking really early at 3:30 a.m. So definitely, I'll share the presentation with everybody who has attended, and from there we can go on. Okay?
Thanks a lot. And if those links don't work, let me know, and I'll make sure I'll get them to you in such a way that the links work.
Sure, definitely, Phil.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
So this presentation and the links you have in the presentation, I'll share the presentation with you. So please you write your email address. I will definitely send that. Okay, Santosh, you can also log out. Thank you. Thanks for joining.